Hello, friends. Miss Dable here. I am going to read chapter 2 of Gooney Bird Greene by Lois Lowry. I hope you guys liked the first chapter. We learned a little bit about characters. We talked about beginning, middle, and end. And we were introduced to kooky Gooney Bird Greene. So let's keep on reading chapter 2 and find out what happens next. Chapter 2. Gooney Bird Greene adjusted her pink ballet tutu she was wearing over a pair of green stretch pants. Her t-shirt was decorated with polka dots. Her red hair was pulled in two pigtails and held there with blue scrunchies. She carefully pulled on one of her pigtails, rearranging it neatly, because the scrunchie was coming loose. She felt her earlobes, which were small and pink and empty. "I should have worn the dangly diamond earrings I got from the prince," she told to the class. "Maybe I'll wear those next week." "Diamond earrings? Prince?" Mrs. Pigeon asked. "Well, actually, the prince didn't give me them earrings. I got them at the palace," Junie Bird explained. "Why were you at the palace?" "Well, first I was in jail, and then—" Gooney Bird interrupted herself. "That's a long story." She reached down and tidied her socks. "May I come up to the front of the room to begin the story?" she asked the teacher after she adjusted her clothes. "I like to be absolutely the center of attention." Miss Pigeon nodded and stepped aside so that there was room for Gooney Bird to stand in front of the class. "You might as well sit down, Miss Pigeon," she said. "Take a load off your feet." Miss Pigeon sat down in the chair behind her cluttered desk. That word cluttered. Does anybody know what cluttered means? Cluttered means something is very messy. Touch your nose if you can think of something you have that's very cluttered or very messy. Maybe your backpack, maybe your room. Cluttered means something that is very messy. And Miss Pigeon's desk was cluttered. She looked at the clock on the wall. "Okay, we have 15 minutes before math," she said. "Class," Gooney Bird said, "you heard Miss Pigeon. We have just 15 minutes, and there are so many Gooney Bird stories I might tell you. But today I only have time for one." "Who has a suggestion for a story?" she asked. Ben's hand shot up. "Tell me about how you came from China," he said. Nicholas said, "Why are you named Gooney Bird?" Chelsea wiggled and wiggled in her seat. The palace, she said. "Tell us about the diamond earrings and jail in the palace." Other hands were waving, but Gooney Bird mentioned for those children to put her hand down. She looked around the room thinking. "This is the title of the story," she said at last. "How Gooney Bird Got Her Name." "Just like how the leopard got its spots," Barry Tuckerman said. Barry, please pay attention," Gooney Bird said. "I like to have absolutely all eyes on me." Then, when the class was silent, and all eyes except for Felicia Ann, who always looked at the floor, when all eyes were on her, she began. How Gooney Bird Got Her Name. Once upon a time, 8 years ago, a man and a woman named Mr. and Mrs. Greene, that's Greene with a silent E, discovered that they were expecting a baby girl. The man's name was Gordon Greene, and his wife was Barbara Greene. They decided to name their baby girl with their initials, G for Gordon and B for Barbara. They thought of many different names. Gail Beth? Gwendolyn Belinda? They discussed and discussed, but never argued and never fought. They had many discussions. Once in the middle of the night, Mrs. Greene woke up because she had a dream about a name. She nudged Mr. Greene, and he woke up a little bit. Then she said, "Georgia Babette." "No." He went back to sleep. One night, Mr. Greene woke up, and he nudged his wife. He told her that he had a dream. "Gazpacho banana," he said. "That was a nightmare you had," said his wife, "not a dream," and they went back to sleep. Finally, they could not make up their mind about a name. They decided they would wait until the baby girl was born, and then they would look at the baby and somehow just know that her name should be Grace Bridget, or Gloria Bonnie, or some other name. They waited and waited for the baby to be born. It takes many months, as you know. Gooney Bird paused her story. She could see many of the children were waving their hands and had things to say. Class, she said, any comments, any questions? We have 9 minutes left, Miss Pigeon reminded the class. Kiko asked in a small voice, did he really say gazpacho banana? Yes, he did, Gooney Bird said. I only tell absolutely true stories. Barry Tuckerman stood up beside his desk. I was named B for my grandfather. His name was Benjamin, and that's my name, Ben called out. My grandmother was in college when my grandfather went to jail, Barry added, or he would have gone with her. Tricia raised her hand. My cat's name is Fluffernutter, she said. 4 more minutes, Miss Pigeon announced. Let's let Gooney Bird get back to the story so that we can hear the end. Did you notice, class, how she's using characters and dialogue? And her story is full of suspense. It's a cliffhanger, isn't it? What a good storyteller Gooney Bird is. Suspense is something when you can't wait to find what happens next. So at the end of chapter 1 in this story, we had suspense. We had to wait to find out what was going to happen in chapter 2. Suspense is when you just can't wait what happens next. You're so excited. Ready, Gooney Bird asked. Ready, shouted the class, all but Felicia Ann, because she never shouted. Okay, here comes the ending. Finally, one spring morning, the baby girl was born. She had red hair. Look, her mother said. She wiggles her head around looking for food when she's hungry. Isn't that cute? It reminds me of something, but I forget what. Her father peered down at the new baby in his arms. He smiled. She has very big feet. Isn't that cute? She reminds me of something, but I can't remember what. Mr. and Mrs. Greene looked at their sweet baby. They thought and they thought. It's coming to me, Mr. Greene said, at last. Do you remember when we watched that bird watching trip on various islands in the Pacific Ocean and we saw all kinds of marine birds? That's it, his wife said. She looks very much like one of those birds. But which one? Let's get the photo album from that trip, Mr. Greene said. They turned the pages of the album. Double-crested cormorant, she said. They looked down at the baby. No, she didn't look like a double-crested cormorant. Redneck grebe? Mr. Greene suggested. They looked at the baby. She does have a red neck, Mr. Greene said. She does not, said Mrs. Greene. It's pink. They turned the pages more. Suddenly they both said, oh! Very carefully they looked at the photograph, and very carefully they looked at the baby. Big feet, just like our babies. A head that bobs around, just like our babies. That's the one, they agreed. They read the label under the photo. Lysian albatross, the label said. I don't think Lysian albatross Greene is a very good name for a girl. Mrs. Greene said sadly, it sounds too scientific. I agree, but look at the small point. Together, Mr. and Mrs. Greene read the words in small print, often called a Gooney bird. Gooney bird Greene, they said. I like the sound of it. Mrs. Greene said, and it has a G and a B. It does indeed, said Mr. Greene, so they decided to name their new baby girl Gooney Bird Greene. Then everyone, including the doctor and the cleaning lady, hugged and kissed and did a waltz together. The end. What a lovely story, Mrs. Pigeon said. It gives us a chance to do some scientific research. We should look up the Lysian albatross in the encyclopedia. Thank you, Gooney Bird. You may now take your seat and we will start math. Wait, wait! Beanie's hand was waving in the air. Yes, Beanie, Mrs. Pigeon asked. What's wrong? I want to hear about the diamond earrings. I want to hear about the palace. That's a different story, Gooney Bird said. She's walking back to her desk. Tell it, the children said. Barry Tuckerman jumped up and stood beside his desk. I want to hear about how Gooney Bird came from China, he said. I came on a flying carpet, Gooney Bird said, but that's a different story, too. She adjusted her pink tutu and she sat down. Tell it, the children called. Miss Pigeon laughed. I'm sure Gooney Bird was just joking about the prince and the diamond earrings, she said, and the flying carpet. Gooney Bird opened her arithmetic book. She opened it in surprise. No, she said, I wasn't joking. I only tell absolutely true stories. Well, said Mrs. Pigeon, will you tell us another story tomorrow? Of course, said Gooney Bird. And that is the end of chapter 2. Before we close today, I want you to think about fiction and nonfiction. Fiction is a story that is fake, make-believe. Nonfiction is a story that is true and tells you real facts. Do you think that Gooney Bird Greene is fiction or nonfiction? Think about that, and I will see you later for chapter 3.